This week, Mulele and I review Kabi Nagata's memoir manga, My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, a story about dealing with depression and how the author started to overcome it. First, support this and all of our shows by joining us on Patreon. You can support us for as little as $2 a month, get extra content for $4 a month. Pledge $10 a month for at least 3 months, and you're eligible to review the book of your choice with me on the podcast. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. We appreciate your support. This is Tim.
And Mulele.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim on Skype with Mulele in Tokyo. How are you doing?
I'm good. And you?
Still coughing, not because of coronavirus.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. I don't know. Actually, it turns out it might not be allergy either, though. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about memoir manga called My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness by Kabi Nagata, or Japanese order Nagata Kabi. That's the way it's written on the front of the book. And this book came out, 2016 in Japanese, is what I saw, and also came out in English and got a lot of praise and some awards, I believe. And I feel like, it's kind of less about the lesbian experience than it is about mental health.
Yeah.
And she writes about how she went through a really low period after high school because she didn't see her friends anymore, and she was looking for some substitute, and a job was not a good substitute for that. She wasn't going to get unconditional acceptance at a job, and went through starving herself, through binge eating, through cutting herself, and just sort of repressed herself sexually altogether, and didn't take care of herself for a while, take a bath like once a week or something. And finally, she kind of starts to wake up. It's interesting to me, it seemed to be all self-driven. As she kind of worked through her, thinking through her problems and kind of realizing things over time, she turned herself around. There were little pushes from other people. Like, she talks about those job interviews she went to for jobs that she wasn't all that interested in, where it came up that what she really wanted to do was manga, and they encouraged her, which really moved her, I guess. And so she did start doing more manga. And then, yeah, well, I'll stop here. I'll let you talk.
Okay, thank you. Now, the thing that drew me to this comic, and I suggested that we do this one, is it had gotten a lot of play a couple of years ago, and I was always curious about it. And it just seemed like such an odd title. And I was kind of wondering, is this an actual lesbian thing, or is this some other kind of thing with a funny title? And as it turns out, it truly is a lesbian thing. But the reason why I suggested we review it is because I got about 10 pages in, and she talks about how she did cutting and some of her musings on depression. Really struck a nerve with me in how I dealt with my own depression and anxiety with thoughts of suicide and all of these things. And also with being trying to break into comics. When all these feelings came up for me, I'd already debuted in comics, but my career just floundered after that, and that's when all the negative stuff really creeps in. And she also had a taste at one point of comics, and it kind of went the same way. She would win a contest, get an editor, and then shit wouldn't go well for a while, and then it'd be a couple of years before she could publish again.
Mm-hmm.
And it very much mirrored my own career, but or currently mirrors my own career. I'm still waiting for my big lesbian hit, but it's not quite there yet. But basically, kind of seeing all of this stuff reflected back at me kind of made me feel the truth of this author's experience. And I wanted to see more how she dealt with all of this stuff. And I mean, it does right off the bat from pretty much the first page. You're into this lesbian situation. And then she's kind of talking about the damage on her body from all of her various problems. And then she goes back and kind of details what had happened. And it's quite interesting. And it seems like the lesbian thing would be some sort of sex comic way of drawing you in. But actually, it is the moment of catharsis where she realizes her way through.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're actually starting at the moment where she begins to heal. And then she goes back and tells the story, which is really, really interesting for me. It is kind of brilliant in its setup.
Yeah, we open with that first lesbian experience with the escort service girl. We get a few pages of that, and then she jumps back 10 years and starts telling the whole story until we get back up to that point. And yeah, I mean, it's a pivotal point, both in, finally sort of getting, as she says, getting to the side of people who know. Now that she's actually had a sexual experience, whether it went as well as she had hoped or not, she's kind of crossed over to the other side then. And then on top of that, she decides that the best way to express herself in manga is to write about herself, and she puts some early version of this story up on Pixiv.
Yeah.
Is Pixiv a Japanese site? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I've never used it personally, but I think Oscar's used it.
Sort of a Japanese version of DeviantArt. And so then she starts to get a lot of recognition for her comic, and things have really turned around in her mind by the end. She's not thinking about suicide anymore. She thinks about how she's so much more satisfied with life than she was. She's finally gotten the sweet nectar, as she thinks about it.
Yeah, it's kind of a unintentional metaphor. Intentional metaphor, I don't know, but I mean, the sweet nectar of life after the lesbian experience is like, all right. But
hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, there's several panels of her that she seems to be like eating honey, like Winnie the Pooh or something.
Yeah. One thing that I found kind of, I don't know, interesting, or it was interesting, but I didn't necessarily like it. I didn't feel that it wasn't necessary. I didn't feel that it wasn't necessary, but I felt at the same time, are we really at this point where we have to do this? Is where she details her life and how she was having so many problems and what depression was. And that part was excellent. And that was at the front of the comic.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, she starts to detail how she came to be a gay woman. I didn't think that was really necessary. She didn't have to justify that. But she kind of seems like she is needing to justify her sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. For Japanese society, maybe it's a little bit different. I myself, not being gay, have never had to deal with that side of society.
Mm-hmm.
That side, I mean, being on the oh, you mean you're not straight, part of society.
Yeah.
Getting that kind of reaction to my sexuality, I've never had that kind of thing. But
What? You're straight? Said
yeah, so
nobody ever.
So I've never felt the need to justify my own sexuality, but also coming from San Francisco and knowing a lot of gay people, or at least at the time, who lived in San Francisco. I mean, nobody can afford to live in San Francisco now.
No.
Um,
Just Silicon Valley millionaires.
yeah. And whoever that is that's shitting on the streets of San Francisco, and that's nasty. But anyway, yeah, I've known so many gay people or bisexual people that this kind of doesn't matter to me. And maybe the readership it does matter. I don't know, but it just seemed to me to be a shame that she would have to justify it. The whole depression thing and the details of her problem, those are crucial to the story at hand, or to the problem in her life. But the sexuality is actually not, and it's incidental to everything else. Yeah, and so to take that time is kind of a shame.
I feel like in Japan, maybe awareness of being gay and how that really works is maybe at the point where it was in America in the 80s, where nobody knew anything about it unless they were actually gay or living in San Francisco or whatever. You know, like I grew up in Iowa, and there was, homophobia was sort of a natural thing around me. You'd hear jokes about gay, supposedly gay people and whatever, and I think Japan's maybe not exactly the same state, but there are these transvestites on the variety shows on TV and whatever, but yeah, I think maybe in Japan it still requires some more kind of explanation than it does in America now.
Perhaps, and I'm not too aware, but I do feel the talking about her relationship with her mother and how she just wanted hugs from her mother and then wanted to touch her boobs, and then that meant she was gay, and it just seemed a little bit, I don't know, maybe ham-fisted is a better term for it, but in general I kind of felt this is not necessary.
I don't know. I think I was seeing it as, I mean, I don't think all lesbians would have the same story, and I kind of felt like it was still related to her mental illness, where she just felt so isolated, and she wanted to be able to hug someone sexually or otherwise, and just didn't have that outlet.
Yeah, no, that part was actually quite good. It's just when she started getting into, she wanted to meet someone from the escort, and it should be an older woman, older than her anyway, and she just wants to cuddle for the time that they spend together. It all seemed to be just a little bit out of place, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, it's not necessarily a big problem for the story at hand. It just seemed to me to be a little bit off, or a shame that she would have to justify it. But she knows her readership better than I do, because I don't think she wrote this for me.
Yeah. I was also interested in how she talks about how sex is not really taught in school in Japan, and kids grow up like kind of the only information they can get is from like erotic comics or something that are not based in reality often. And she's complaining like, if only someone had really taught me the truth about how sex works and how our bodies work. And she said she wasn't even very familiar with her genital area.
Yeah, I found that really interesting, that her previous experience or understanding of sex and eroticism was through Boys Love Comics. She's like, that has nothing to do with me. But that's
Yeah.
what I used as my basis of what this should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I had not heard of a yayoi hole before. And wow, really?
Right. Yeah. Well, for our listeners, apparently, and we certainly don't read boys love comics or yaoi comics, but apparently, when the two boys do their thing, the submissive partner somehow has an extra hole somewhere that the other partner can put his thing into,
Mm-hmm.
and it has no basis in human biology. But
Yeah.
this also, I know the second time, I don't know, well, I was sleepy today, and the reading it the second time, some of the build-up felt kind of tiresome to me. But the first time I read it, what really sort of struck me was, I haven't really talked about this with much of anybody, but my sister had mental illness, and I know that she cut herself sometimes, and I've never understood why people did that, and she explains it in here that the mental emotional pain is kind of amorphous, and she's not sure how to deal with it. So feeling physical pain is somehow more concrete, and that calms her down.
Yeah, and it's also an appropriate visual reference to the pain that she feels inside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I thought was really, really fascinating too. I thought that was well explained, and I got it for the first time as well.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, how do you feel about the comic? Do you think it's great, okay, so-so?
It's certainly interesting and explores a lot of things that I haven't seen very much in comics. She has some interesting ways of visualizing things as she's explaining, about how she got to this point. She has a lot of sort of visual explanations. Sometimes they're sort of abstract or unrealistic, just kind of cartoony. But yeah, I found that kind of interesting. Including the sweet nectar metaphor for her feeling that she's kind of finally reached the good point of life.
Yeah.
Feeling like she's got something going now.
Yeah. Interestingly, I found this to be quite an enjoyable read. I'm not necessarily interested in reading any of her other comics, though. The story here is so personal and so good, and the problem seems to be working itself out. That there's no need for me to move forward with any other narrative by this person. Of course, if they have published something else, I think she has published one other book which was translated into English. I think I might have seen it in New York when I was there last, but I didn't pick it up.
Yeah, it's called My Solo Exchange Diary. It came out in Japan in December 2016 and in English June 2018.
Yeah, so basically in the book it said, if you liked my lesbian experience with loneliness, you got to pick up this one. But I mean, that just seems like cheap advertiser's copy. So I don't know. I'd have to hear about what that one's about. I'm kind of starting from zero again with this author because this one is so personal. And the real value of it to me is that she is so unflinching in her description of her experience. And that is really the draw here. And that she comes through this experience in a much better place.
Yeah, well, she mentions in the comic that she tried to make fictional, like erotic comics, and she somehow found that more embarrassing
Yeah,
than writing about her own experience,
yeah,
which is sort of odd. But I don't know, maybe displaying her own imagination about it is the reason it's more embarrassing. But yeah, maybe she'll work up to doing some fiction, sexual or otherwise.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if I see her work out there and it's easily accessible to me, like I'm in New York and I'm at a bookstore and I see it, I will look at it more thoroughly. I don't mean to dismiss the artist completely because I've read this story, but it's not like, oh shit, I got to get the next thing that she publishes. Absolutely, it's more like, okay, that was kind of good. I wonder what she's up to now. I wasn't sure how you would take this thing, how it would hit you, because it was kind of an odd book for us to review.
Mm-hmm.
In that we're kind of not the demographic for this.
More than kind of.
Yeah. But I mean, it is good comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that actually is, it kind of goes beyond genre or focus. I mean, good comics are good comics. And I think this one, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think I could identify with it a little bit too. I mean, I don't think I've ever been suicidal, but I did go through some kind of depression late in my own marriage. So I could sort of feel, that's kind of like me. Maybe I wasn't that bad, but it had sort of a whiff of familiarity to it, talking about the depression.
Yeah. For me, more than a whiff, but
yeah,
there's something very familiar about all that stuff, and it was nice to see her explain some of it. It was kind of educational in that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I should detail my life in such a way that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
no,
memoir comics are hot, so.
No, I've already made mine. In fact, I've made two, but no one seems to have picked them up. But anyway,
which titles were those?
That'd be Elvis and Yakai. But I mean, seriously, I mean, Elvis is kind of more of a metaphor of all that stuff than a direct kind of this is the detail of what happened. But Yakai is much more.
In Elvis, you or somebody cut the scene that you actually appeared in, right?
Yeah, no, I cut that. Yeah,
okay.
It wasn't necessary to the plot and was only detailing the fact that I had seen a cat on a walk home, which inspired the story. But it's like, okay, these 2 pages can go. And I've since lost them to time.
Okay. My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness is published in English by Seven Seas Entertainment. Coming up, with Diamond, virtually the only distributor of comics to American comics shops, shutting down due to COVID-19, will comics distribution in the U.S. finally break the monopoly of the past 30 years? Or is it the end of single-issue comics altogether? I'm continuing to republish classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics in reverse order, unlocked by our patrons' generous support. This week's is number 63 from February 19th, 2007, in which Brandon and I discuss coloring and lettering comics, and the classic Batman graphic novel Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth. The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com, or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page or in the Patreon smartphone app. Classic episodes have been unlocked back to number 46. You can help to unlock earlier episodes by pledging. Also, we're $36 away from unlocking a new podcast about the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. It's called The Law of Equivalent Exchange. We're so impatient to release this new podcast that Patrick and I have already recorded the first 3 episodes. It's a chapter-by-chapter reading of the manga, Fullmetal Alchemist, with commentary on the translation, including the sound effects, and on how creator Hiromu Arakawa masterfully put together the story of Edward and Alphonse Elric. If you want to hear our show on one of the best manga of the 21st century, pledge now at patreon.com/deconcomics. When you watched Batman as a kid, you enjoyed the colorful heroes and villains, the text sound effects on the screen, the thrill of watching a heroic crime fighter escaping from death traps and taking down bad guys. But the show was devised to interest adults, too. What did you miss as a kid? Sexual innuendo.
The penguin's too small for me.
Closeted gay characters.
I like that cape, Batman.
Freudian death traps.
Has the giant clam really swallowed Robin?
Police incompetence.
Bruce Wayne is a millionaire playboy. Hardly a secret identity for Batman.
Whether you're a kid or an adult, there's something to like about our favorite Caped Crusader. Tim and Paul dig for the deeper meanings under the Batmania every other Thursday. What's the podcast's name?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
Right, so, well, as everyone on the planet knows, we're dealing with a pandemic right now of COVID-19, and one of the many, many effects that's having on all aspects of our lives is that Diamond has shut down. They're not shipping out comics anymore, and sent retailers fairly flippant note about being creative. Of course, a lot of the retailers are shut down too. Yeah. So not many outlets for the comics. As we're recording this on March 31st, apparently there will be no paper or digital comics tomorrow.
To that point, how do you feel about digital versus paper? Does it matter to you which you get them from?
Well, for the reading experience, I like paper.
Yeah.
But I had to completely give up on paper floppies a few years ago because it was getting expensive to have them shipped over here. And also, small Japanese apartment, no storage space. I'm still trying to figure out how I can get rid of all these long boxes full of comics and get back a little bit of my investment, if possible, rather than just putting them out for the garbage. But yeah, I've been almost entirely digital for the past few years, just kind of out of necessity.
I see. The price point for digital comics is lower than paper?
Well, not really. Although I'm in the Comixology Unlimited, and so it is a bit small lower because I'm in that program.
I see. Okay, I see. I'm not in Comixology anything, and I very much prefer to read things, physical things, than digitally. But yeah, I'll get the comics where I can get them. But see, here's the thing: I'm not going to pay $4.99 for paper or for digital. For 22 pages, nah, they can get fucked. But this is kind of the thing. I switched over to graphic novels a bit ago, and I don't really read floppies unless it's a really good, like a really, really good book that is released only that way. Mm-hmm. And so that's usually like independent stuff. I'll go for that. And the price point, I'm a little bit more flexible if it's an indie work, knowing that the artist will get more of the money, or at least that's my hope when I buy it. Digital is also fine though, as long as it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. I mean, if it's $10 for the book, novella, a graphic novella, or whatever it is, I would expect it to be at least half price for a digital thing, seeing that there's no shipping involved. no, especially if I'm buying it from the artist directly.
Yeah.
I would expect a much cheaper price point. But if it's Marvel, yeah, I would need that thing to be much cheaper.
But anyway, it seems to be that Diamond shutting down like this has become sort of the last straw, and maybe we're finally going to see an end to the monopoly in comics distribution.
Yeah, so what I had seen was Marvel's response was also a little bit tone deaf, in that they weren't offering buybacks of comics that wouldn't sell. Also, it kind of conflates with this new set of characters that they have released that everybody's crying about on the internet. Children of the Atom and what's the other one? The New Warriors.
Okay.
You've not seen any of this?
No.
Let's pause for a few minutes so you can look at it and then come back. Just get on YouTube and look for New Warriors. It's like a 2-minute teaser promo.
Oh, okay.
And then there's Children of the Atom, which is another teaser promo. So if you go on the Marvel YouTube channel, it's there.
Okay, so I have watched both of the trailers. My impression was, boy, are these not for me.
Yeah,
or you. I mean, even less for us than the book we just reviewed was.
Yeah, well, it also doesn't come from any sort of sincere place.
Yeah, it feels like, we're going to put these things in because that it's the now stuff, and it's just like a little bit too much of current stuff. Let's all appeal to all of these audiences in all these ways, and like, yeah, you're right. It feels artificial.
Right, but now Marvel is asking comic shops to buy these books, and when they don't sell, to eat the cost, which seems like a slap in the face on top of all of the stuff that's gone on with this Corona stuff and Diamond shutting down, and Marvel not doing buybacks for the comics that are already in shops, and. So I think a lot of retailers are at their breaking point and they're being shut down. A lot of them are putting up signs saying, don't know when we're going to be back. And actually, one YouTube show I was watching pulled a clip from Kevin Smith's podcast or his YouTube show where he gets the news that Diamond has stopped sending out books. And you can see the wheels turning in his mind, which is like, oh shit, we're fucked. Oh, even my shop with our gimmick, this is not good. And you can just see him going, okay, I guess we're done. He doesn't actually say that, but you can just see he's just like trying to deal with the situation, understanding that basically this is the end of a lot of comic shops.
And possibly some publishers too. Some of the smaller publishers.
It could be. I think it was what was it, Valiant, who said pencils down?
I don't know.
I'm not sure which one, but I remember there was one publisher that said pencils down. We're not moving ahead on anything right now, which is kind of dire. Marvel and DC seem to be continuing with their projects though.
Yeah, you're right. Bleeding Cool does say Valiant told creators pencils down.
Yeah. So with all of this stuff, a lot of people are calling it the end of comic books. Two things. First, it's not the end of comic books because I make comic books almost for free at this point.
Yeah.
And there are so many of us out there who put comics online who are not Marvel or DC or affiliated with anybody, who will continue to put out comics until we can no longer do. So comics are fine.
Sure, yeah, just
Marvel,
maybe the Wednesday floppies maybe go away, but...
Yeah, Marvel, on the other hand, Yeah, they're a bit long in the tooth anyway. And the idea that they're going to rebrand classic characters to fit a new demographic is really sad. And it's the reason why a black Superman doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not its original thing.
Yeah.
I mean, people can't get enough of Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a black superhero.
Yeah, and he's always been that.
He's always been that. And he's his own original character.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very empowering about that. But being the black version of Superman, or Superman for black people, is kind of cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of what they're doing when they have a female version of Cyclops or a male version of Jean Grey. It's just uninteresting, unimaginative, is very, very cheap in its idea.
Mm-hmm.
And when the editor says in that one clip, "Oh, we've got totally new characters," and then proceeds to roll out all of this stuff, it's like, who the fuck are you kidding? It's offensive on the face of it, but in this kind of situation, no, I'm absolutely not interested, and I feel totally justified in my hate for Marvel Comics. Now, if Marvel does actually make good stuff, I'll check that out, because I'm very interested in the Marvel Universe stuff, cinematic universe stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I actually like those quite a bit, as we've detailed on a long-running series. Tim catches up with the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yep, which we have now completed, at least until Black Widow comes out.
Not completed, just caught up.
Right.
You finally caught up. But and I'm very curious for what happens in Phase 4, and I look forward to talking to you about it. But as far as floppies go, I was done a long time ago, and I'm fine to just read graphic novels at this point. Mm. But of non-Marvel characters, because really, one other thing that someone pointed out in all of this, as I was checking out YouTube videos, because I live on YouTube now. The problem with these characters, that they've been around so long, and they've been retconned and refitted and updated and relaunched so many times, that they're completely out of context. Mm-hmm. You know the general story of Spider-Man and Superman, but you don't know the story, because there is no story. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of a vague kind of, oh, well, there's this and there's that. And there are some people who know the entire thing from front to back. They've read every issue of all of these things. But how do you relate that shit to another person? It's not good storytelling. So at a certain point, story needs to end. And that was the thing, the complaint I had originally about why I left Marvel Comics.
Right. Well, this is well-trod territory on our podcast. I wanted to talk about the possible change in distribution. Right.
Well, the change in distribution is that I see a big bunch of failure from Marvel, and that's what I'm leading up to. Sorry to be long-winded about it, but...
Yeah, I mean, I've heard those same sentences from you many, many times.
I suppose it's an ism with me. But anyway, the point is, I don't think Marvel's going to do very well unless they change on these two fronts.
They're so afraid to give up their kind of core type of comic, and it just they don't seem to want to branch out. They think we're a superhero comic company and we're just going to do superhero comics, even if the audience is no longer there. And our audience keeps shrinking. COVID-19 aside. It's nothing like the numbers they were getting in the speculation in the 90s.
I don't think superhero comics are dead like that. I think that the superhero comics are fine. There's a market for that. Mm-hmm. But they're not telling any new stories with any new characters.
Well, and they're not getting they're not really getting the younger audience either.
Well, why read a comic when you can play a video game?
Well, or there are other comics that are more appealing to people in their 20s and 30s rather than superhero comics that have such a long back history that it's kind of hard to get into them. I tried a couple times and gave up on trying to get into DC because I never read that stuff as a kid, and I just can't make any sense of it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I'm not a big DC guy either. Although I did at one point like Batman when I was a kid. The thing that DC put out was that they were looking for a multi-distributor system, which means that Marvel has to step up. DC is also talking about buybacks. Sorry, we talked about this off mic, so
yeah.
I'm not sure how much of this I already said, but DC has said they'll do buybacks for some of their books, and look, they're moving forward with what seems to be an eye on the fact that if the comic shops close down, they lose a large chunk of their own market, and that it's actually an ecosystem that they're part of. Marvel hasn't come to that decision yet, and if they don't, it's going to be hard for everybody, especially for Marvel. And part of the thing that I was getting to earlier, I think was also off mic, about Disney's woes, is that if Disney has to cut their dead weight, and if Marvel Comics is in the red, that's an easy one to cut.
I see here
the best property's already there.
I see here on CBR that DC is going to continue putting out the comics digitally. They believe that it's a different audience from the group who buys the paper comics, and yeah. So all our data shows the digital consumer and the physical consumer are two different audiences. For now, we're going to continue to release digital comics, but we'll revisit this if the pipeline for physical distribution continues to be challenged and disrupted.
I wonder if that is actually true and if that's going to work, because if we see both streams readily available, then yeah, maybe there's some truth to that. But if one stream is shut down, then those people who are interested in the next issue of Batman are going to go digital.
Yeah.
And then once they've gone digital, do they really want to buy and read the same story a few months later? That only works if you're a completist.
Yeah, I don't mean, or even, the subsequent issues, would they go back to paper, or would they say, you know what, this digital stuff is all right. I've got more storage space, so I'll just stick with digital now.
Either way, it seems like a funky idea, and I don't think that's going to work. There's still a lot of trouble brewing. There seems to be a little bit of a ray of hope with the DC statement. We'll have to see what Marvel does coming down the line. The idea that Diamond is no longer going to be the bottleneck of comics is really, really good. And I think you're seeing a lot of that with book distributors and bookstores. So with graphic novels. But for the floppy, this could be the end.
I'm seeing here on CBR that Marvel is... let's see. In a statement released to Newsarama, Marvel Entertainment's president Dan Buckley spoke about a discount. They're discounting their titles. I guess, not buying back, but making them cheaper.
Yeah. Well, look, if I'm buying a Big Mac, whether it's $3 or $1.50, doesn't really matter. It's still a Big Mac.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's an old Big Mac, really doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, and the cheaper comics aren't very useful if the store's closed. So,
well, it may be an after-the-fact thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they try to do the same thing that DC does, where they do digital and then a few months later put out a bunch of paper comics at half price, that's not going to work. And by that time, the market has already shrunk.
Image is also offering to returns to buy back the comics.
Okay, so that makes two of the big four, big three?
Yeah, I don't know, but I think I don't know about the books that are out. I guess Dark Horse is not putting out any comics for the time being.
Okay, I have no idea about Dark Horse. I haven't heard much news about them. They're usually an afterthought in these press releases or these news roundups, but only the ones that are kind of shocking or really big and bold in their statements. Dark Horse has not been either of those. So in that sense, if the floppy dies, does it matter?
Well, are you suggesting that maybe they would be available just digitally, or that would also go away?
No, because look, if they release these, what they've got digitally for the next couple of months. Now we don't know how long this Corona quarantine is going to last. I think, which country was it? England said 6 more months, and America said 30 more days. But Trump's a fucking idiot. and he's teasing it out as it comes to a point where he can't refute it, because consider a month ago he was saying, oh, it's just 15 people, it'll soon be down to 0 and everything will be like new again. Now where are we? Building hospitals in Central Park. So if it comes to that and we have all of these digital comics, they can't seriously be saying, okay, now we're going to put out all of these comics, whole 6 months or 1 year or whatever it is, out on the newsstands or on the comic book shops all at once. Or we're going to stagger it 2 weeks apart for the next year so everybody can catch up with the paper product, even though they've already read the digital one. I can see people saying, okay, you want a physical copy in your collection, here's a trade paperback which collects the last 6 months. That I could see. Which means there's a whole section of floppies missing. And I don't think it's going to be very, very good. I think it's going to hurt the floppy market quite a bit. And to be honest, if it doesn't really regain any momentum, we're looking at a downhill slide to the end.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. And it's fine. You can get your comics. You can get superhero comics as a graphic novel, and that would actually do a lot to improve their storytelling. Because their storytelling is fucking bananas. I'd rather see them approach superhero comics in a graphic novel form. Because even the graphic novels of Spider-Man or Batman or whatever that I've seen have been of better quality when it's written as one big chunk and put out that way, rather than, 22 pages every month. So, yeah, it could be the end of the floppy, and I'm okay with it, but how about you?
I don't know. I don't really have an opinion yet. I see now there's a newer story here that says that DC rescheduled the digital comics that were supposed to come out April 1st.
To when?
To April 29th. So
okay, so they're pushing back a month.
Yeah. So for a month there won't be any DC digital comics. I don't see anything about whether Marvel's putting them out or not.
Okay.
Well, tomorrow night when I look at Comixology, I'll see if there's anything there or not. Maybe a new comics page with nothing on it.
I see.
Anyway, so we'll just have to keep an eye on this as it progresses. We may have a shutdown here in Japan by the time people hear this, so we might have a lot of time to keep up on what's happening or not happening.
Hey, my university postponed itself for 21 days, so fortunately I get paid regardless, but otherwise I'd be having trouble making rent this month. But yeah, I've got no work for at least 3 weeks, or at least no university work. And by that time, I think it's going to extend. So I think we are looking at a shutdown.
Yeah, I'm just waiting to hear from my school, and like you, I get paid even if it's closed. And I've got my private students who are mostly on Skype. So no problem there. And possibly some proofreading work also that is emailed to me, and I do it at home. So
yeah. Well,
so I feel fortunate because I know there are a lot of people who's are losing all of their income because of this. So
yeah, well, for me, some of my income is face-to-face and students, and some of it is a comic publisher who lives in Brooklyn, which is the epicenter for all of this. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, my income's a little bit less than it was, but I'm still kind of doing okay.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we hope all of our listeners are getting through this well too, and we'll see you again soon.
Until next time.
Support this and all of our shows by joining us on Patreon. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. Pledge at least $4 a month to get all our additional podcast content, including reviews of superhero movies. Last Saturday, we published our review of Spider-Man Far From Home. Next up, 2002's Spider-Man, starring Tobey Maguire. At $4, you can also get opportunities to participate in the show. This week, I'll be posting a question to patrons, and I'll share any answers I get on next week's show. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. You can also help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. And share our episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls to a larger audience. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us, and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Next week, the graphic novel Berlin by Jason Lutz, about life in the title city during the decline of the Weimar Republic between 1928 and 1933. Kumar and I will be here to discuss it, and we hope you'll be here too. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.